And one day, Kosciuszko tells Grippi, listen, I've got to go across the Hudson because I want to do some drawings and I want to find where to put the best hills to put cannons on that side of the river. I'll be back in 3 days. Grippi says, I have a log cabin to myself for 3 days. We'll have a party. So he invites all the black people at West Point to his party. Whether they're slaves or free black people, they all show up at Kosciuszko's log cabin. They start going through his stuff, they find his wine, and they drink all of his wine, and they start getting drunk. And then Grippi goes through Kosciuszko's suitcase and finds his dress uniform from Poland. He tries on the jacket with the gold epaulets here, and he finds a hat which has a ostrich feather sticking out of the top. And then Kosciuszko took his boots with him, so he finds his boot polish, shines up his feet nice and black so it looks like he's wearing boots, and he starts dancing around. How do I look, guys? I'm Kosciuszko. And all the other black people say, oh, Kosciuszko, thank you for inviting us for wine. How nice, how lovely. Great little party you're having here. Well, the real Kosciuszko couldn't cross the river and came back the same night and walked in the middle of this party. All of these black men freeze as if they'd seen the devil. They start rushing for the door, jumping out the windows. And poor Grippi here falls to his feet and grabs Kosciuszko's legs and says, please, Massa, Mr. General, whip me, kill me, do whatever you will. Kosciuszko says, arise, Prince. A prince from Africa should not prostrate himself at the feet of any man. And he takes him and he drags him across West Point to the other officers and says, gentlemen, we have here a prince from Africa who's come to join the cause. By the way, he likes to drink. So they make him finish the wine, and they make him drink brandy and gin, a concoction called Hollands. Then they make him smoke a giant peace pipe in his honor, because he's a prince from Africa, until he gets sick. So rather than waking up with whip lashes on his back, as was the customary treatment of black people in those days, he woke up with a really bad hangover, basically a good college hazing. So Grippi went on to retell this story many times over the years. He ended up becoming a caterer in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, where he was quite successful. He would tell this story many times. So, but at West Point, the two of them worked very closely together. And Kosciuszko kept telling all the Americans that, listen, we have these hills, we need to put cannons on all of these hills. Because if not, the British will come and put cannons there. The same thing will happen that happened at Fort Ticonderoga. We'll be sitting ducks once again. Well, the Americans don't listen. And here, you see West Point as it looks today. This is a statue of Kosciuszko at West Point, and the chain was stretched across. This is where the fort was, and the chain was stretched this way. This vantage point that you're looking at from right now was a spot called Rocky Hill, which Kosciuszko dubbed Redoubt Number 4. So we need 200 men up here at all times with cannons. Just down below, there's another hill where he built the fort called Fort Putnam. He said, this Rocky Hill, Redoubt Number 4, is the Achilles heel. And eventually, George Washington says, you know what, Kosciuszko's right. Let's put forts up there. Let's do it the way he says, not the way the French engineers say. So they build, down below this, they build a spot called Fort Putnam. This is Fort Putnam from one side, and this is it from another angle. And as you can see, it's a pretty massive fort. And if you're coming from below, there's no way that you're going to be able to climb up that wall. So after 2.5 years of working on this fortress, Kosciuszko tells George Washington, I'd like to go back into battle. I built here 13 different forts and redoubts. The British can't attack this position. And Washington says, no, I need to keep you here because you're the only engineer that knows what he's doing. But eventually, the engineer of the South is captured, so Washington says, okay, go to the South. And when he does that, Washington puts Benedict Arnold in charge of West Point. Now, every child in America learns at the age of 5 who Benedict Arnold was. He was a traitor, the most infamous traitor in American history. What American historians don't tell you is what his act of treason was trying to sell Kosciuszko's plans for West Point to the British. And what Benedict Arnold did, I went through his letters and I found he's now in charge of West Point. So as the commanding officer of West Point, he tells the Americans, we don't need 200 guys up on the redoubts before, we only need 3. And then he writes a letter that I found to the British, in which he says, when you come in, come in that back way through Rocky Hill, and I'll make sure that there'll be no men up there. So that's what his act of treason was. Now luckily, when he gave this map to Major Andre, who crossed British lines to try and deliver this map, showing all the forts, Major Andre was captured. He was hanged, and Benedict Arnold had to run away. He escaped. But because of Kosciuszko's incredible fortress that he built there, the British were never able to take this position. They were never able to divide and conquer the colonies as they had planned. And Kosciuszko's fortress became the Gibraltar of America, is what Washington and the other officers called it. When Kosciuszko gets to the south, he arrives in Virginia, and you see here a map of Virginia at the time, and you see the dark shaded areas were the areas where they kept all the slaves. And he meets here for the first time Thomas Jefferson. And he sees that Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote, "All men are created equal," owns slaves. And he realizes the hypocrisy of this. And he's there with Grippy, traveling through the South. And he's put in charge of different battles. And eventually, his task is to surround Charleston and choke off Charleston so that the British can't push out further from there. Now, together with Grippy, Kosciuszko has an incredible rapport with black people. And he develops a network of black spies that sneak in and out of Charleston and tell him where the British soldiers are, and who the loyalists are, who the good guys are, who the bad guys are. And that's where he finishes the revolution down in Charleston. And after 8 years in the American Revolution, he decides he wants to sail back to Poland. But on the 8th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the Americans decide that they want to have a firework display. And they put Kosciuszko in charge of creating these fireworks, because he knew he was a captain of artillery early, and he knew how to make these displays. So he does the first 4th of July display in the United States. Now, the Americans owe him $12,000 in salary, because he was a colonel and then a general, and they can't pay him. So they give him an IOU, the Treasury's not set up yet. They give him this $12,000, they say, we'll pay you 6% interest on this. Because he can't afford to go back to Poland, he ends up meeting this man, Haim Solomon, who gives him the money. Haim Solomon was a Polish Jew who came to the United States in 1775 and makes a fortune trading currencies. In fact, he opens up a business at 22 Wall Street and takes out an ad in the paper saying that he's handling every merchandise available. And he makes so much money that he ends up making hundreds of thousands of dollars trading these currencies. He becomes so rich that he becomes the chief banker of the American Revolution and funds much of the revolution. And he makes so much money that the British arrest him in New York and they throw him in jail. He escapes from jail, he goes to Philadelphia and opens up a Bruges, which is basically a stock market in the back of a coffee shop on Front Street, Philadelphia. And again, he starts making all this money, giving it to the rebels. And he becomes friends with the founding fathers and starts giving them loans, but he gives out these loans that he doesn't really want the money back. He gives loans to Jefferson, to Madison, and he gives Kosciuszko $142, which is most likely the money that Kosciuszko used to sail back to Poland. Now when Kosciuszko gets back to Poland, he sees that the situation is the same. Here you see a painting of Warsaw at the time and Russian troops stationed on the opposite bank. Now Kosciuszko is completely disgusted with feudalism and serfdom. He says serfdom should be cursed by all enlightened nations. And he likens it to slavery in America, because it's essentially the same thing. This is slavery of white people, that's slavery of black people.